one of the most essential parts of any rites of passage that I have been through that are intentional is an intentional face-off with death. I decided I would fast alone in the woods for 10 days. I became very, very addicted to pot, weed, and that led into a pretty serious addiction to opiates.
As men, I think often that we set up a world or a life in which everything looks really good, looks perfect, like a good job, good car, good house, whatever that thing is. But often on the inside, the story can be completely different.
Emotional man is a man who's driven by his emotions. But a man who can feel his emotions rather than be emotional is a powerful man. Joined a men's group, got to sit down with guys, is like, hey, the expectation here is you being brutally honest with yourself and with us. We will love you so much that we'll tell you the things that you don't want to hear.
I've known Shaun for quite a while because you're actually working with Casey a few years ago when she was pregnant.
Yep.
Yeah, so I've known of Shaun, but I've only really gotten to know you in the last sort of 10 to 12 months. And yeah, Shaun is a man of deep presence and the wild man. He represents a man that is not afraid to be out in the wilderness. I'm really happy to have you here, bro. So anything you want to introduce yourself with, maybe where people could find you on socials and on the internet?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you for having me. It's going to be a lot of fun, I think. And finding me online is pretty easy. It's at Shaun LD Cooke on Instagram and ShaunCooke.com as a website. So I'm not exactly hard to find.
Awesome.
Yeah, and as far as introducing myself, for a long time I thought I was just a trades guy. Like I was in carpentry and building and I ran a carpentry company. And then I fell in love with firefighting, which is another trade. It's not something I thought of as a trade, but it's like all of the trades all at once. And so I was really invested in the physical skills. And during that time, I was living out in the wilderness. So lots of outside time, lots of practical skills, right? Firefighting is everything from building construction to plumbing to electrical and mechanical, all of it, rescue, ropes. And that's what I really thought that I was going to do until I realized that how unhappy I was going and being at my dream job of being a firefighter. It fulfilled my practical desires, but none of my emotional ones, which I didn't even know I had. And from there, I went into men's work, and well, we could talk about that, but that's how I got into the work that I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, that's a good sort of segue into one of these questions I had here, because one of my beliefs of what's really missing in today's modern culture is a rites of passage or an initiation into manhood. And what I found in my life and a lot of my friends as well is that we'll make certain decisions or perhaps start addictions and stuff that act as an unintentional rites of passage or an unintentional initiation.
Yeah.
Is there anything in your life that sort of you look back now and you think, fuck, that was a fucking initiation on the deepest level?
I like where you're going with this question, because rites of passage are something that is desperately needed in our world, especially, well, I don't know about especially for men, but that's where my world is with men. And we have so many rites of passage that have been watered down, like a wedding, for example. That could be viewed as a rite of passage or an initiation, but now it's just a party. Yeah, before I go on, I know you had a little question there, then we could talk about some things that happened in my life too.
Yeah, just because when you say, you went from carpentry to firefighting, and for a lot of people, that sounds like you've made it, right? Once you've gotten there, then it's like, cool, I've got my dream job. I'll just chip away for the rest of my life, and I should be happy because I've ticked all these boxes.
Yep.
The piece that I was going to interject there was that I think it's especially important for men because women have these natural rites of passage, especially with birth and pregnancy, which is a full initiation on its own. And there's a clear threshold they step over from being a woman to stepping into motherhood.
Yeah.
And it is the same for men, but it's not the same.
Yeah, 100%. And as an aside, right, women have that very clear threshold that they pass through a 9 months, if not longer, process of, carrying the baby and then birthing it and all of that. And it's missing our intentional rites of passage behind it that once were. And so I believe that's what it is. For men, we don't carry a baby for 9 months. So we do need very intentional things, right? And whereas women in that, they get to face creating a new life. And men, one of the most essential parts of any rites of passage that I have been through that are intentional, and through all of my reading and research and all of that, is an intentional face-off with death and our mortality. And by design, it shouldn't be easy. Moving from one step to another is not easy. And so, yeah, I think it's really important for men.
What was one of those unintentional things that has occurred in your life that ended up as a initiation for you?
Yeah, so there's two that I'm going to pull out here. And the first one was, you kind of mentioned it earlier, addiction. In my early 20s, I became very, very addicted to pot, weed, cannabis, whatever you want to call it. And that led into a pretty serious, like a functional addiction, though serious one, to opiates, pharmaceutical opiates. And that took me down a dark path, and like I almost overdosed a couple of times. I very remember clearly a couple of times where I stopped breathing. Man, like luckily enough, I started breathing just before passing out, and just be like, oh my God, hey, Kevin, who was my friend at the time, like, you forgot to tell me that I need to breathe. And looking back, it was just like, oh yeah, whatever. Like, that's just an unintended side effect, whatever. But looking back on it, like, that's pretty serious stuff. And like going through the withdrawal from that was its own initiation of like, am I going to be here in this world, or am I just going to let myself keep going down this path? And like the opiates in particular are very dissociative and like energetically literally take you out of this world to be comfortably numb. And so that's one of the unintended ones that I went through. I would say another one was a little bit more intentional, but no less also unintentional. I got really sick at one point, and by the end of that sickness, it was about 2-3 weeks. I knew I had to quit my job as a carpenter. So I quit my job. And then I knew, and this is just me just following what was coming through, I knew I needed to leave my house and just go on a solo mission. So I packed a bag, left, took a ferry across to Vancouver Island, which is near where I was living. And on my way, I met someone who redirected me to a tiny little island called the Skeety Island. I believe it has less than 1,000 people living on it. And there's a passenger only ferry, so that you can't get vehicles there unless you barge them there. And basically, as soon as I got there, I was like, oh, and I think I was 24, 25 at the time. Got there and I went, I need to spend some time in the woods by myself. And so I went and made myself a little camp in the middle of the woods and decided that I would be there and I would fast. And that was the very first time I'd fasted. This is not the way I would suggest it for anybody. I decided I would fast alone in the woods for 10 days.
10 days. No.
And I was like,
just jump straight in.
And like that's the ignorance of youth, and I really grew a lot then. And I would say that was definitely an unintended, intentional rite of passage when I look back on it.
So you lasted the whole 10 days without eating?
Yeah, I lasted the whole 10 days. I had the book, The Tao of Pooh, with me, which is a book about Taoism, which was wonderful to read. It's basically like, go with the flow, follow your heart, follow where life is leading you. And that's exactly how I had gotten there. And that really led me to listening deeply within myself for, I would say, well, the rest of my life. Like since then, I have been. But that led me on all sorts of different paths that I never even considered before, one of which was firefighting.
Yeah.
But that ended up taking me to northern Canada, firefighting, living in the woods, all of these things. All of it came from simply following the whispers that I heard that said, hey, go to the woods by yourself.
Yeah, right. And so that solo mission by yourself is what got you out of carpentry and into firefighting?
Eventually. Yeah, like when I originally, it was about a year after that I ended up moving north, and I was already building furniture for myself, like kind of sort of started my own furniture making company. And then when I went north, I was still building, and I was building log cabins. I was building timber frames and off-grid stuff, really funky buildings. And that's when I started my kind of contracting company. And then through living up north, I actually, like, firefighting wasn't even on my radar until I just said, hey, I want to be more involved in my community. And I started volunteering at the fire hall. And then the rest is history. I fell in love with it super quickly.
Yep. So just following the whispers.
Following the whispers, exactly.
Cool. So this was originally the first question, but what's your spirit animal?
What's my spirit animal?
And why?
I mean, right now I'm in deep communion and relationship with the bear.
What does the bear represent for you?
The bear for me represents strength, represents strong family, which is not something a lot of people relate to with bears, but they keep, especially grizzlies that I'm most familiar with, they keep their young around a lot longer than a lot of predators do. They keep them for a full 2 years. And mama bear looks after cubs, right? But its strength, it's that gathering of resources for winters, and then it's cycles. Like I'm a very cyclical man. Throughout my whole life, even when I was working 9 to 5 jobs, worked way better at sprint, rest, sprint, rest. And so I'm just in communing with that cycle, of rest and work, as well as like the gathering resources and just gathering resources for the winter, for the family. And being an apex predator doesn't help you.
Have you ever been face to face with a bear?
Oh yeah, many times. Yeah. I mean, I grew up in North Vancouver, and that was a pretty regular occurrence for us to have black bears in the yard and in the driveway. And like, I remember just coming home at night and there's being a black bear just sitting where I want to park in the driveway, and you just honk at it until it goes. You're having breakfast and black bears coming through the yard. But yeah, I mean, black bears are just curious little guys. You don't need to worry too much about them.
Yeah, right. Well, I was waiting for you to bust out a story about how you've wrestled them with your bare hands, broken necks.
Nah, I wouldn't be wrestling with bears or anything like that, but one of my favorite random small memories is I was actually house sitting, and this was when I was living up north, and there used to be this really big blonde grizzly mama that lived in the neighborhood. And I just remember like looking out, there's a beautiful house that I was house sitting, and looking out across the deck, across the lake. And then this mama bear and her 2 cubs just strolls on into the yard and sits down right out front. And she just sits there kind of eating grass and chilling out while her cubs just wrestled all over her and chewed on her ear and chewed on each other. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Sounds cool. It's not something you'd see in New Zealand, for sure.
No.
All right, next question. How has a failure or apparent failure set you up for success later on?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the most impactful failure for me was actually failing a test, the job that I had, a fighting fire, which ended up meaning that, because I was just on a temporary contract rather than being permanent, ended up that temporary contract did not get renewed.
We ended up failing the test.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I had previously passed that test several times with like flying colors. I had everybody, not even close to failure. And
so this was a physical test?
No, it was practical skills test.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was physical, but it was about the skills that we were demonstrating. And because I had done so well on it previously, I just didn't take it seriously. And it was that failure that gave me the space to reflect, hey, I'm not actually happy here. Even though this is still something I strongly desire, to be a firefighter. The culture and where I was at in my life, I wasn't happy. And that gave me the space to really go down the road that I'm at of being a complete, emotionally intelligent man and working with men to help bring them to being a higher quality of men in the world.
That's how the journey started, by failing this test. How did you sort of land in what you're doing now and like really wanting to help men be the best versions of themselves?
Yeah, like I said, that gave me space to reflect, and also it gave me space to join a men's group. And that was the first time I sat down with men in a place where I wasn't just in crisis. Because, in crisis, I could go to my guys and be like, hey, I'm in crisis. And usually it ended up with us drinking lots or smoking lots of weed rather than actually advice. But in this men's group, I got to sit down with guys. Is like, hey, the expectation here is you being brutally honest with yourself and with us. And we will be brutally honest with you, and we will challenge you. And we will love you so much that we'll tell you the things that you don't want to hear.
Yeah.
And that changed everything for me. Like that, it was that group that allowed me to look back and said, not only was I not happy, I was desperately depressed. Like throughout, up until that point, I would say my entire adult life, I had been depressed and suicidal. And if you had asked me if I was depressed, despite the fact that I had suicidal thoughts daily, if not hourly, I would have said, no, I'm not depressed. I'm good. Like, I'm a happy guy. But looking at it and went, wait a second, that's not normal. That's some heavy shit to be carrying. I really allowed things to start changing.
Yeah. And I think that's going to start resonating, because as men, I think often that we set up a world or a life in which everything looks really good, looks perfect, like a good job, good car, good house, whatever that thing is. But often on the inside, this story can be completely different.
Yeah, so many men are carrying so much weight. And like you said, I had a good vehicle. I was engaged with a wonderful woman, had my dream job. I had started another business by then. I was running another business on the side. Things were good on the outside, but like there's so much weight that men carry that they don't talk about or even look at within themselves that leads to drinking every night of the week, that leads to massive spikes in suicide, which leads to men in partnership in marriages that quite frankly are shitty partners and therefore have shitty relationships and shitty marriages, and then they crumble. And we ask, why the fuck is the divorce rate so high and the suicide rate so high? It's because men don't have places to be honest with themselves and honest with others.
And I love what you mentioned before about the culture at your workplace when you're a firefighter. And I think that actually extends out to society in general. I know in New Zealand, our multicultural is strong, but it's also being twisted in a way because of colonization. And as well in Australia, I've lived in Australia for the last 12 years. And what I feel like is missing there is a big part of culture that men are missing their identity. How have these men's groups and this sort of, I think what you're really tapping on there was the accountability and the reflection and being a mirror, because I think that one of the strongest forms of love is telling that ultimate truth, like you said, whether they want to hear it or not.
Yeah.
So where do you sort of see the world at the moment in terms of the culture of Western society? Because it's no longer sort of country to country. This Western society is across multiple countries. And how do you think that needs to shift?
Yeah, I mean, I am very hopeful because I'm seeing it shifting, right? There are more men's groups. There are more men working with other men. There are men looking at themselves and reflecting and saying, hey, our world isn't working how we're set it up. So I am very hopeful. And we are in a culture of still boys don't cry, right? Man up, toughen up, don't be a pussy, even though a pussy is the toughest thing in the world, right? It fucking gives life. But I think people listening will know what I mean. And like that is a culture that views men as tools, right? Tools to produce things, tools to make money, tools to protect whatever it is. Men are tools instead of men are also fucking human beings. And like, I think the biggest thing that's missing, because I think most men realize they have emotion. It may sound a little condescending, but like most men feel their emotions, but they don't have any permission to feel them or their spirit. And I think it's the spirit that is missing, because I think that's what connects emotions with physicality is the spirit. Yeah. And when that's missing, they're going to be separate and they're going to be completely isolated from each other. And then you can just ignore your emotions. Yeah. Stuff them down until they blow up, which is, of course, not a good thing.
Yeah, I love that. I've never actually heard it articulated that way. But how would you define spirit?
Asking all the small questions, eh? How would I define spirit? I mean, I think it's the knowing of myself that I am more than just a physical being, right? Like spirit can be taken to being this big religious thing if we want to. And if someone believes that, great. But is it like, do you know yourself as more than just a physical being? That I believe is tapping into your spirit. And for me, I go way deeper. Like I believe that we are all multidimensional beings, part of oneness, as deep as you want to go, right? And our spirit, let me back up a second. So I believe our universe is based on consciousness. Consciousness is the one, the everything. And I believe everything in this universe is an expression of that consciousness, whether it's a table or your notepad or you or I or a rock. And the lens through which that consciousness is expressed is my spirit. The spirit of Shaun, or rather, Shaun is the focal point through a lens that is my spirit, and Shaun is the expression of that consciousness through that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We went a little deeper than I was planning, but that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's cool. It's a cool way to look at it. It's different to what I've heard before. So I'm glad we got to ask that. When you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what do you do? Because like I mentioned before, you used to turn to drugs, alcohol, this new upgraded version of Shaun. What does he do?
I mean, I will start by saying I'm also not perfect. When I feel overwhelmed and under-resourced, I still get to scrolling or zoning out or, Recently, it's been just cleaning my house, which is better than scrolling. But what I do when I'm feeling overwhelmed, when I feel like I'm stuck or I'm frozen, is through my work, I understand myself more to be a frozen person. If I go into a survival response, I freeze. And so for freezing, we need energy, right? Just like to heat up an ice cube into water, you need energy. And so when I'm in a freeze response, which for me is where I go when I feel overwhelmed, I need to move energy. So for me, that's often breath work. Energizing Wim Hof is great. I start every morning with it. It could be an ice bath, it could be working out, it could be just going for a walk. It's getting energy up. And then when I come back into whatever it was that I was doing, I have energy that I can then pour into something instead of that energy being suppressed and repressed.
And so you're a men's coach. What questions do your clients ask you the most? Or what is the question that your clients ask you the most?
Why is my partner bugging me so much is a big one, right? There's a lot of stuff around relationship. And really, like, I work with men both around business and relationship because I believe the two are a huge reflection, but almost an opposite reflection of each other. For most modern men, I believe that most modern men are unconsciously overly emotional at work. So they don't realize how much their emotions drive them at work. And so our work together at work is to figure out how to feel those emotions, bring them into consciousness, and then use them as a source of information instead of the one driving the bus. Whereas at home, and this is where this question comes from, why is my partner nagging me so much? I believe men are unconsciously cut off at home from their emotions, right? Because when they have expressed emotions at home, and women are no less susceptible to the culture of boys don't cry than men are. Women will often meet men's emotion with like, oh, you're just being too emotional, or like you're unreasonable, or like you shouldn't care about that, or toughen up, or whatever it is. And so they have learned through culture and often their partnerships that being emotional at home equals bad, being uncontrolled, or that emotional at home makes violence. That's something they've learned from their fathers or maybe even them. And so diving into bringing the emotions forward in a healthy way at home is why I often work with them around why is my partner nagging me so much, is getting in touch with their emotions so that then they can also feel their woman's emotions instead of just deflect, defend, and say, you're being an emotional woman.
Yeah. And for men who their partners are asking for more of them emotionally, but they don't quite understand what that means, what would you say to that?
Yeah. Vulnerability is the big buzzword these days. And I would say receptiveness is actually what people are looking for, what women are looking for in their men. They're not necessarily looking for men to be emotional, right? An emotional man is a man who's driven by his emotions. But a man who can feel his emotions rather than be emotional is a powerful man. And women want their men to be powerful. And so not only does she want him to be tapped into his emotions and know when to express them and how to express them, but also as we tap deeper into our emotions, we can feel them more. And we can feel their emotions instead of the words that come out of their mouth, which often looks like blaming, like nagging, like attacking, when really generally the women are scared.
Yeah.
Or like, think that if you've done this, if you've done X, it means Y. And really they're just scared. And they want their men to be able to feel that instead of just listen to their words.
Yeah. So that receptivity is like another form of active listening.
Yeah, I mean, it's a deeper level of active listening, right? Because there's the skill of active listening of like, I'm going to nod and I'm going to say yes, appropriate spaces, and I'm going to mirror back what I hear. That's beautiful. That's a wonderful skill. Yeah, and that's a good place to start.
Yeah, because often women will say, you're not listening to me, or I feel unheard. And you're like, bitch, I remember every single fucking word you said.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's a layer of that emotion that they haven't felt that's been received.
The deeper listening, and like, we love them for it and we hate them for it, that women are so receptive and so perceptive and like all they want from us is that receptivity and is the presence to be there for the receptivity. And they know the instant our mind goes off thinking about rugby, hockey, or whatever, they know the instant. It's like, why are you listening? It's like, I got all the words, but it's like, no. They felt you be not present in your body. in your mind. And that's what they want. Because when we're present in our body and our mind, that's when we can actually receive what they're saying, what they're feeling. And it's more than just about the word he said.
Yeah. Well, that's a good one for all the men and husbands out here. Write that one down. What is a thesis or principle that you try to live your life by?
I mean, I often say the overall rule of life is don't be a dick. Like, really, it's like,
And it's so true, right? But
it really is.
Simple
Like,
thing.
it's super simple. Like, if you're a good man, and I said good man rather than a nice guy, right? We go down that road if we want. But if you're a good man in here who's trying to do your best and trying to grow, and you're not a dick, you're ahead of 90% of the curve.
Yeah.
And like, it's shocking to me how true that is. Like, at my gym the other day, like I do CrossFit. And so we were in class, and one of the guys was just beaking off.
What does beaking off mean?
I mean, talking shit.
Yeah.
Just beaking off. And like the coach was laughing it off, and he was talking about another kind of exercise. And sure enough, the very next day, it came that we were doing that exact thing. And it was so funny to listen to him eat his humble pie and say, wow, that was actually really cool. That was good. And like, that's such a small thing, small example of don't be a dick, because it's going to come back and hit you in the face. But really, like, I mean, you want to talk about karma or whatever, like, it all comes back around.
Yeah.
So don't be a dick.
So true. And just while we were on that, how would you differentiate a good man from a nice guy?
Yeah. So a nice guy is a term that came from the book No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover. And this is how I would say most men in Western society have been raised to be. And so I want to say, first of all, that even if it's not my fault, your fault, our fault, or how we ended up as nice guys, it is our responsibility to do something about it. And the nice guy is someone who was raised rather than here's what you need to do to be a good man. He was raised by here's all the things that you shouldn't do to be a good man. And the reason that's important is that I learned that you shouldn't be a creep. So you shouldn't stare at women. You shouldn't objectify a woman. You shouldn't be violent, because that's dangerous. You like all of these shouldn'ts. So I grew up being very scared of any of my desires or my primal nature, because all of them touched some shouldn'ts.
Yep.
And so I suppressed all of that and became very nice. I opened doors for all the women. I was really nice. I was afraid to make a move, because if I made a move on a woman, then I was being aggressive, and maybe she'd find me as a creep, and then I was a rapist all of a sudden, which of course is not true. And so nice guys are the guys that are unwilling to ask for what they want, who are unwilling to put themselves on the line, and instead of asking for what they want or moving towards what they want, they'll manipulate to get to what they want. So the nice guy thinks he's being nice, but he's actually being an asshole, because he's trying to manipulate everybody.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, it's the guy that says, I've taken her on 2 dates and I've paid for both dates. Why aren't we making out yet?
Yeah.
It's because you have an unconscious agreement. What does he call it? Robert Glover has a term for it, which I can't remember at this point, but it's basically a covert contract. That's what it is. In his mind, he's made a contract that if I buy you dinner, I get a kiss at the end of the night.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, his date didn't agree to that. That's why it's covert. And if she doesn't agree to that, all of a sudden he gets mad at her. He resents her. And all of a sudden that nice guy turns into resentment and turns into an asshole.
Yeah, wow. And in that same situation, what would his sort of principles be in that?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, being upfront.
Yeah.
Right? Oftentimes nice guys won't even say that they're going on a date. It's like, hey, can we go out for a meal? Whereas a good man will be like, hey, I'd love to take you out on a date sometime. You want to go for dinner? And so just being upfront. And if towards the end of the date, instead of expecting something, he's going to ask for it, or he's going to move towards that in a good, respectful way. Like, I have talked to so many men that like around dating and things like that. And they're like, how do you make the first move? How do you kiss a gal or things like that? And, there's a couple of different ways you can go about it. Mine is fucking simple. You ask her.
Yep.
I'm in a long-term relationship now. I was before, but like for the last 10, 12 years, every single woman I've kissed, I've asked her. And guys are like, well, isn't that going to make it awkward and all weird and shit? And it's like, sure, I've been turned down a couple of times and they say no. It's like, great. Now I know where we stand.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to kiss. Or yes. Okay, great. Let's fucking make out or kiss. Right. And so it's just being upfront, asking without attachment, asking without an expectation. It's like, here's my cards.
Yeah.
Let's put them on the table. I will say, like, I grew up playing card games and board games. I love strategy and all of that. And in those games, it's really important to keep your cards to yourself, right? It's really important. If you want to win, you don't show anybody your strategy. But the further I get into life, and I used to be really proud of that I would never show my cards until I just lay them all down and I win in life. However, life is a team sport with a lot of unknowns. And in order to bring people in on your team, you got to show them what you got. Yeah, you got to put your cards on the table. So instead of holding those cards back in covert contract and expectation, say, hey, this is what hand I'm playing right now. Do you want to play with me?
Yeah.
Then you got a teammate instead of an opposition.
I love that. And the right woman will say yes anyway. If she says no, then it's like, cool, you're probably not the one for me anyway.
Exactly. And like, if you want to just sleep around and be a fuckboy and you want to play a different game, great. Go play a different game.
In the last 5 years, what's a new belief, behavior, or habit that's most improved your life?
I would say number one is journaling. I'm going to stick with that. I would say that journaling is the thing that has made the biggest difference on my life in the last 5 years. And
Are you journaling intentionally, or is it just more like brain dumps?
a little bit of both. Yeah. I will say, like, because I've always been intrigued about how to be better as a person, as a man, and all of this. And one of the most common things that you hear is, you should journal. So I have attempted to journal for a long time, basically since my teens. Every now and then I'd pull it out and go, dear diary, this is what I did today. And it was like, that's this bullshit. I don't get it. I couldn't make the journaling habit stick because I just didn't get it. And it was actually sitting in men's group and having men ask me very intentional and direct questions that often I didn't want to answer, but I also did want to answer, if you know what I mean, that I realized I can just do that for myself. I can write down my thoughts and be like, that's fucking bullshit. So what's actually going on here? Or like, just basically be my own men's group.
So in your journal, you're almost having a conversation with yourself?
100%. Yeah. And, sometimes it is a long, deep conversation. Other times it is just a brain dump. And it's like, okay, cool. That was a brain dump. And I got to know myself a little bit better in that. And one of the most important things, I can't remember who said this, but this concept of our minds, our brains are meant for having ideas, not holding ideas, is really key for me. And brain dumping, even if all I'm doing is brain dumping, allows my brain to not hold ideas.
Yeah.
Lets my ideas have a place where I can grab them. I can just brain dump and say, hey, there's some key concepts or there's some key things that I need to do. I'll put them on my to-do list or whatever. All of a sudden, I'm not wasting all of my energy trying to hold on to those ideas.
Yeah. So it's like keeping it in flow, keeping it in cycle, and like just allowing the energy to move.
Yeah, exactly. And through that, right, I get to know myself more. Yeah. I get to see myself more because instead of just having the whole front of my brain being like, I got to hold on to this idea and this idea, this idea, and this idea, all of a sudden, all of that's gone and I can see behind it. Oh, that's what's going on behind it. And, the more conversations you have with someone, the more you get to know them. So the more conversations I have with myself, the better I know myself.
Yeah, that's cool. This is a bit more fun one, but if you could have lunch with any 3 people in the world, who would they be and why?
I don't think it'd be productive, and I definitely don't support his ideas, but I think having lunch with Donald Trump right now would be interesting, to say the least. I don't think I'd probably get a word in edgewise, but it'd be interesting. Having lunch with Lex Friedman, she's a podcaster, and he talks to a lot of different people, would be really interesting. He's a super smart dude.
These are, by the way, these are 3 people at the table at the same time. Not sweet for bunches.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, I mean, I'd be down. So who'd be the shit disturber for all of that? Trump, Lex Friedman, bringing in our mentor Preston would be pretty interesting in that conversation too. Something like that, or Alexi. Yeah, we'll put that there. Yeah, I think it'd be an interesting conversation, especially if we were allowed to talk about anything, and let's see what Trump does.
Why those 3?
Well, like I said, Trump I think would be purely just to like experience him firsthand and the fuckery that is his mind. Lex Friedman, I really enjoy the way he thinks and how he listens to people. And then Preston would be a wild card. to make things more interesting. He's a big personality. I think probably definitely clash with Donald Trump, but he's also not afraid to tell it like it is and talk straight. So I think that would be an interesting mix, that's for sure.
Yep. I'd like to be a fly on the wall. All right, last one. If you could have a gigantic billboard on like a main freeway that thousands of people are going to drive past every day with anything on it, what would you say on that billboard and why?
I think it would say, if you can get through today, you can get through tomorrow. And if you can get through tomorrow, you can get through anything. I know that's the message that I often need to hear still. And that is the message that a lot of people who are suffering in silence need to hear.
Yeah.
Is, hey, essentially, it's going to be okay. You can do this.
And I love that because it sort of wraps up a lot of the concepts that we've talked about, right? Like the presence and being in the moment, because I think a lot of these emotional feelings that men tend to push off, they come from the anxiety of thinking about a future that doesn't even exist, which is always taking us out of the present moment.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's like, I think that anxiety is just a bunch of fears that haven't come to pass. And fear is just a bunch of shit that has happened that you think are going to come to pass. And neither of them are true. And so, yeah, that's one of the reasons why presence is so powerful, and to bring yourself into that present moment. So that was a great wrap up.
I love that. Well, you've definitely lived up to your reputation as the Canadian Jesus. So thank you for your presence. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for sharing part of your journey. And yeah, I'm sure that there's going to be some golden nuggets that come out of this. I myself am going to attempt again to journal consistently for a while after this conversation. So yeah, it's been a pleasure having you, bro, and look forward to more conversations like this.
Sound good. Thank you so much, man.
Boom.
Boom. Fuck yeah.